And there we go. So let's start with this stuff. I'm not even starting with the slides. We're going to start with that. So first, my beard, because I can. That's the simple answer. Everybody always asks me, are you going for the Santa Claus look, or what are you doing? I grow it because I can. Simple as that. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, let's start talking about some other stuff. So, some reasons to get certified. Developers have traditionally not wanted to get certified. And I'll be honest, I was in that category of, there's really no reason. All everybody asks about is experience. I'll give you a couple of reasons why. First off, in 2005, I was going for a job interview. And I remember, first off, .NET was first released in 2002. And I'm going in 2005 and looking for work, and I'm going through the ads online. And there was a ton of ads for C# and VB developers, but they all said they wanted 5 years experience in .NET. And I'm going, oh, so they're looking for somebody from the product team, because that's really the only people who have 5 years experience in .NET. And that was not really correct. The correct answer was that a HR person who had no idea about programming wrote the ad and said, yeah, we want 5 years experience because that sounds good. And they had no idea what they were talking about. Now, in order to get that job, though, where you actually talk to, or at least get past the HR person who doesn't know how many years .NET has been released, in order to get past them, you need to do something to differentiate yourself. Having a certification will help with that. If the if the HR person who does not know a lot about .NET sees, oh, they're certified, you can get to the actual person that knows something about .NET, that knows .NET's only been out 3 years, but you can talk to and say, yeah, well, I know I do this and this and this. So that's one reason to get certified. You want to get past a hiring manager, and they don't always know what they're talking about. And that's my proof. There aren't any hiring managers in here, are there? Some of them are good. Some of them are good and know what they're talking about. But I'll be honest, I saw ad after ad that said, we want 5 years .NET experience, and they weren't paying enough to get someone from the product team. So, and I talked to some of them, and I'm like, .NET hasn't been out for 5 years. And they're like, well, we just wanted some experience, and they just really didn't know. It's not that they were bad, it's just they didn't know. Someone said, hire a C# developer, and they go, okay, and they start filling out paperwork. And so anyways, so that's one reason. Second reason, you have similar experience, or it's down to you and one other person for a job, but you're certified and they're not. It's a differentiator. Third reason, you're starting out. You don't have a lot of experience, okay? If you have a certification, you show that, hey, at least I have some breadth of knowledge on this topic. I know something about it. I may not have written a lot of code that's in production, but I know about the product. I know about the syntax of the language. And by the way, this test, that's what they're testing, syntax, okay? There's not a lot of case studies in here. It's a lot of syntax. Why developer exams are the way they are. So why are they syntax? Why are they not, let's write some code, and if you get some data back from a database, you pass that question? Why can't they do that? And the answer is, not yet. The answer is, they're working on it. In fact, some of the C# exams are starting to move in that direction. I was just talking to a friend of mine who is a C# MVP, and he said, oh yeah, we're trying those, they're trying out some of those types of exam questions. But the heuristics that are involved, because there's, first off, I should start here. So programming is an art form. I think it's an art form and not a science. Okay? It falls under science, but think about how many ways there is to do something, which one should you use, which one is best. That's very subjective, very, very subjective. So, and part of it comes down to corporate culture, not just even, it's not even just that's the best way. There are many best ways. It's just that's the corporate culture, that's the way we do it. And that could be because that's the way the first developer they hired or the architect does it, and that's the way you're going to do it. So we can't, the heuristics involved with testing code in that kind of a way where there's 14 ways to do it, let's see, you pick one, do it, and if it works, great. The heuristics of trying to do that, of trying to test that, are too complex to scale right now. We would need like supercomputers to be working hours and hours and hours to grade the tests. And I assume you guys want your results right away. So heuristics involved, not quite there yet. They are working on some for SQL Server. I assume they'll do them for developer eventually, that a developer test will be, okay, write some code in Visual Studio and you'll get full IntelliSense, and that's the other one that ticks me off. I want IntelliSense. Hey, I don't remember all the object methods, and I have Visual Studio to do that. I actually walked out of a job interview once because they wanted me to type code in Notepad. And I said, am I using Notepad in the job? And they said, no. And I said, well, then why am I doing it in your example? This isn't a real life example. And I walked out. Actually walked, figured I didn't want to work for a company that thought that way. I think I'm happier. Actually, I know I'm happier. I got to become an MCT and teach classes and do stuff like this. All right, continuing, because we got a lot to cover. We only have 68 minutes left. So why developer exams are the way they are. So that's part of it. The heuristics involved in actually having you write code and then evaluating that code are impossible at the moment. We'll get there. Computers are, and I'll be honest, MSL, Microsoft Learning, will take a while to get there, even after, and it needs to scale. Look how many people are in this room. If all of you took the test today, imagine how many, so it needs to be automated. Can't do it any other way. So how do we test that you know about C#? How do we test that you know about the language? And the answer is, they're going to get kind of picky about it. They're going to be really picky about syntax. So a lot of this exam is syntax. You need to remember, I was talking to someone here a few minutes ago, and we talked about the double question mark, for example, that's brand new in 2015, or .NET 4.5, and how that checks for null. Right? So I don't have to do a null test anymore, because that's something really common that we all do. As an MVP, that's one of the things we ask the product team to do. It's like, can you fix it so we don't have to do like an if then else to check if something's null? Can you just do it for us? And they're like, probably. And it's in it now, so it's now there. So that's part of it, they're going to look for syntax, language changes, things like that. So you have to be detail-oriented. And actually, that's not a bad thing. Being a programmer, you have to be detail-oriented. If you miss a semicolon somewhere, your program isn't going to work. That said, Visual Studio usually tells you that, but still, in the exams. So the exams are picky, yes. And they're picky because we're an art, not a science, and it's really hard to test that kind of stuff, test knowledge. What they really want to know is they're not trying to trick you. That is true. They're not trying to trick you. So be aware of that. Another thing, CertGuard. So there are many ways to prepare for an exam. My way to prepare for an exam is to walk across the hall and go to the sample tests, measure up as across the hall. It is 100% free. Actually, if you write down the URL on one of the machines, you can access it from anywhere in the conference center, because they restrict it to certain IP addresses, and the wireless network in the conference center is one of those IP addresses, or is in the range. It's probably not one IP address, but it's in the range that they allow. So anywhere in the conference center on your laptop, all you need is the URL to the landing page. The landing page will give you the email address and the password you need to use to sign in. Then you'll need your email address, and then you can take this practice exam or any of the Measure Up ones that we offer for free. Directly across the hall almost, 103. 103. And so that's how I prep. One of the cool things about the Measure Up tests is if when you take the test, you click on the right side. I don't remember. The left side's like it gives you an exam like the real exam. The right side is kind of practice. And if you click on the right side, then at the bottom there's a drop down and it says, do you want to see the incorrect answers when you're done as you do it? Or do you, and they'll show you the answers and they'll explain why one is right and one is not. And they actually give you links to MSDN and other Microsoft resources that talk about that particular topic that they're trying to test you on, the syntax that they're trying to test you on. So I think that's a great way to prep. We were supposed to have books, but they got lost somewhere in the convention center, so we can't lend you books. There are 6 boxes of books somewhere in this conference center. They were delivered. They were signed for on the loading dock. Nobody seems to know where they are. But they're supposed to be here. Anyways, so that's one way to prepare. That's my way to prepare. You can get a book, or you can do the practice tests, or however you're attending this. I'll be honest, we're not going to talk a ton about code in here. I'm going to talk more about techniques. We have a few test questions towards the end that we'll play with. But the real thing here is techniques that you can use to get prepared. Some people are just really good at testing. I know one guy who we had free tests one year at I think it was back when it was Tech Ed, and he took like 10 of them and passed them all, and he didn't prep for any of them. He's just really good at taking tests. If you know the topic, I'd still, rather than waste the money, I would still go and do a Measure Up. But there are many test prep, there are even other practice exams online. So there is a major rule as far as Microsoft goes in that you cannot use a brain dump. Now, sometimes it's hard to tell, is this a brain dump or is this a valid practice exam? CertGuard.com will tell you whether Microsoft considers it a brain dump or not. So you can go to that and check and see whether it's a valid one. So that's why I did CertGuard. Oh, that MSL study hall, remember I said the URL? That's the URL. That's the one that'll get you on Measure Up. So if you take a picture or write down that last URL, that's the one that gets you the practice exams. They will be available until tomorrow sometime. I think we close at what, 1:45? So at least till 1:45. And then at some point shortly thereafter, that Azure website will be taken down. And you will not be able to access them for free anymore. Yes? A brain dump is where they're trying to get, where they have people who take the exam, and then everybody writes down as many of the real questions and real answers as they can remember. So they have real questions and real answers, and that's not allowed. So the Measure Up is purposely not that. And the ones that Microsoft recommends or approves, those ones are purposely not that. They're close, and they do similar things, but they're not exactly the same. All right, the next thing I want to do, so I want to go on the web. I don't want you to see my Dropbox account. Oh, wait, we should do that. Before I get rid of Dropbox, let me do this. Public link, shorten link. There we go. Control C. Let's go to Notepad, and let's see if this will work. There it is. The slide deck that I am using, that is a public link to my Dropbox, and you should be able to download it from there. It has changed a tiny bit since it was posted, and it should be available through Ignite as well. But I made like 3 changes to it. They weren't major. I mostly changed the name because it was from the last person who used this deck. I just use other people's decks and then talk about what I want to as I go along. That's just me. All right, now that I've done that, where's my cursor? Help. There it is. Cool. Cancel, cancel. There we go. All right. Give me a moment. All right, the first, oh, shoot. I wonder if that slide deck is on here. Do you know if the slide deck with the new certification paths is on here? www.ms.ignite. Okay. Let's see if this works. Is this what I was? Oh, there it is. I just want to open it. I don't want to download it. I just want to show it to you. There we go. So Microsoft changed the certification paths. How many of you have passed certifications in any shape or form before? Most of you? Okay. So they changed all the certifications around on Monday. Now, you're all thinking, oh my God, this is terrible news. This is really bad. No, it isn't. Here's why. So far this week, I know of at least 4 people who got emails that told them they had brand new certifications without taking a test because they changed the paths. So if you've passed the right exams, they gave you the new certification. You don't have to do anything. So I don't know, did any of you get an email that said you have a new cert? Yeah? No? Well, let's talk about the new certs for a moment, because this is kind of cool. So mobility is not us. Productivity is not us. Data management, here we are. So this last one is us. So the 483 works on both of them. There are 2 exams, and then you become an MCSA. If you pass those 2 exams, you're already an MCSA. If you pass the 480 or the 483 and the 486, or the 483 and the 357, you're now a MCSA. You're done. You're already that. Then you take an elective, and here's the list of electives. You pass one of those, and you become an MCSD, a solution developer, Microsoft Certified Solution Developer. Someone corrected me yesterday. I thought it was software developer, but it's solution developer. Now, it says what happens is you get an earned date. And then next year, you take another one of these electives, and these electives will periodically change, and you keep your MCSD up to date. You'll have 2017 on it, and then 2018. Be aware, certifications never expire, but they are in the technology you took. So if you take the 483 programming in C#, you're getting it in C# 5.NET 4.5. That's what we're testing. So by taking one more exam, you update your cert. You keep it what we call current. So one exam a year from the elective lists, and as I said, this pool will change periodically. They'll add new exams to it as time goes along. And they're still working out a couple of minor kinks, but a lot of people I know got 1 or 2 new certs this week just because they changed the path. So this is a much easier path than what there was before. Before, I couldn't. It took like a PhD to figure out the path. Now it's like easy. And there is a, the reason was they wanted to make it easy. We want people to get certified. We want to make it easy for them to understand what's going on. Here we go. It's very simple. So this is all on the website correctly, but it doesn't look like this. I have spent many hours in the booth talking to the product team down on the expo floor, and they are going to put this up. Actually, it's on the blog. The blog post from Monday, at least that main slide is on it. I think all of them are on it. So they should make all these available, because this is a lot easier to understand than what I'm about to show you. At least I think it is. All right, so this is the MSL website. Let's click on certifications. And we'll go to developer. And so the first thing you can become is an MTA, which hasn't changed. And then you become a solutions architect, and there's two, one for web and one for universal Windows. And if we click on the universal Windows, here's our 483. And if we click on take the exam, it takes you to where you schedule it. So it's half of 165. Someone asked, how much is it here? It's half of that. You do need to sign up soon. If you want to take it, sign up soon, because they're only offering it till 1:45 tomorrow, and I don't know if that's when you start the exam or that's when you have to be done. You have to be. So yeah, the last appointments are like 10, 11 tomorrow morning. All right, now people want to know what's on the exam. Well, here's what's on the exam. So, first thing is that, can you guys, that's pretty small, huh? Is there something in here that will let me make it bigger? Of course not. And this, of course, doesn't touch. Annoying as heck. All right, so they want you to know about multi-threading and asynchronous programming. And on my practice exam that I took like 20 questions on, there were 2 questions on that. It's going to make up over 25% to 30% of the exam. So these sections, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts, are going to make up a third to a quarter to a third of the exam. So multi-threading. This includes knowing about the task parallel library. So Parallel 4, P-Link, tasks. How do you create a task? How do you use a task? Continuation tasks. And that was one that I did get on the practice exam. It was a continuation task question. How do you spawn threads using the thread pool? They combined those 2 into 1 question. That doesn't mean that's what's on the exam. Remember, this is just the practice exam, which I'm allowed to talk about, I think. Or I'll get in trouble and never be invited back, one of the 2. Async and await. And async and await, you guys know about that one, right? Do you guys know best practice? Never use async void, except for top-level event handlers. Everybody know that? Always return a task. Otherwise, the calling code has no way to know when your method finishes. I have a whole slide deck on that. So how do you synchronize resources? Locking. How do you cancel a task? So you should know how to create the token to cancel the attack, to get the token to cancel the task. Ugh. It's early for me, or I had a late night, one of the 2. Probably both. Thread safe methods. Then implement program flow. So how do you iterate across a collection or an array of items? How do you make decisions using switch statements? If then else. How do you, operators and evaluation of expressions. So I talked like about the double question mark. That's probably going to come up somewhere because that's brand new. They added it to the latest version. You can pretty much be assured that it's going to wind up in there somehow. I should also mention this about the exams. While they have a really big pool of questions that they pull from. So you never know, even if you take the exam twice, you will not get the same exam. I'm not sure how they do it, whether they have set exam groups or whether they just pull random questions out of but they won't tell me. But they do have a large number of questions. You're only going to take like 40 of them, 50 of them. And they're going to have like tons more that they pull from. So the idea is if you retake an exam, you shouldn't see the same questions. Or at least, you'll maybe get a couple, 3, but hopefully, probably not many more than that. You won't get a lot of the same questions. All right, so how to create and implement events and callbacks. So you should know how to create an event handler. Well, pretty easy. Subscribe and unsubscribe events. Built-in delegate type. So you need to know how to create a delegate and how to use a delegate. Lambda expressions. They like lambdas. I agree. I can use them now, but I'm not really comfortable writing them. But know how to recognize them and know how to recognize if they're built correctly. Because recognizing whether it's built correctly is hugely important. Remember, this is a syntax exam. If it's not built correctly, it's wrong. Also remember, I don't think I talked about this, there's only one right answer. Okay, and Microsoft is really careful about that, especially on the developer exams. That there can only be one right answer. It says best answer, but really one right answer, because if they have too many, if they have 2 right answers, someone will say the other one is best, and Microsoft doesn't want to deal with that email. So they always decide, is this the right answer? There should be one that works correctly and that does everything. It'll say best, but usually there's only one that works. The rest of them are syntactically incorrect, at least, especially for the scenario. They'll give you a scenario at the top too. It'll say, this is what we're trying to do. So we want a bunch of, as an example, we want a bunch of we have an inheritance chain. So the base class, we want to make sure that someone has to inherit from the base class, but they can't instantiate the base class. How do you do that? And then these methods, one of them doesn't have any code in it, so it's abstract in the base class, right? Because it's just a method signature, so it's got to be abstract. And those kinds of things, those are the kinds of things you need to look for. Also, be careful when you read the scenarios. Scenarios will tell you what they're looking for and can give you very important clues as to what the right answer will be. Let's see. So I talked about events and callback. Exception handling. So how do you create and use exceptions? How do you rethrow exceptions? How do you catch different kinds of exceptions? Know about a finally block, what it does, what you should put there. And they even give you some resources at the bottom. It says preparation resources. So they have links even here to help you. All right, the next section is also 25 to 30%. It is create and use types. So structures, enumerations, how do you create them? How do you use them? You should be able to see, and this is all on the website, you should be able to see if something isn't built right. If the code won't compile, it's not right. All the code should compile. Reference types, generic types, constructors, and constructors and inheritance. They're going to probably throw at least 1 or 2 things about that at you. Why? Because it's an easy place to differentiate you guys. It's a place where people will make mistakes. Let's see. How do you consume types? So no abstract, protected, all those different What do you see when something's declared protected, and where do you see it, and read the scenario, because that's going to tell you where that stuff, what they're expecting. Class hierarchies, iDisposable, that's another one that I wound up seeing on the, where they implemented well, they sort of implemented iDisposable, and then I had to pick the lines of code that go in the missing spots. So where do you do things like tell the garbage collector to delay disposing, or what's the word I'm looking for? Dang. Suppress finalization, that was what. So where in an iDisposable interface would you suppress finalization, for example? That's something you need to know. That's something that they might ask on the exam. And they'll probably ask it in a way where they're like, you see the implementation of iDisposable, and you're going to pick 4 lines of code to fill in some blank lines. That's one of the kinds of questions I saw on the practice exam. And by the way, they use these are the, I should mention, these are the goals of the exam. These are the objectives. They were used by the exam writers to write the questions. They were also used by MeasureUp to create the practice exam. So both sides, even though they're different question writers, they're both using the same objectives. Let's see, enforcing encapsulation, so public, private, protected, find, execute. So reflection, another one of my not favorite topics. I know some developers use it a ton. I don't particularly love it, but you should know how it works, what you need to do to get it, that it takes 2 lines of code to do virtually anything in it. Just to get a property takes like 2 lines of code. First you have to get the type, and then you have to ask it for the property. Kind of not a lot of fun. The object lifecycle, as I said, iDisposable. How to manipulate strings, so string writer, things like that. The next 25 to 30%. I just realized that this all adds up to like 30, 60, 90, 120% if they do the maximum on each of them. Someone wasn't thinking when they wrote this. So how do you validate application input? So how do you serialize and deserialize data? That's probably going to come up. JSON especially. How do you do JSON? Encryption, both symmetric and asymmetric. Manage assemblies. How do you manage assemblies? And they will ask about the global assembly cache, even though, in my opinion, it's going away. But they'll ask about it, probably ask about it on the exam. So like, what do you do to put something in the global assembly cache? Well, you have to strongly name it, or it won't go in there. Even though it probably, well, .NET Core is designed to be cross-platform, and you can't, global assembly cache on a Mac, so I think it's eventually will go away. But because I think that's the direction they want to go. They don't want to. The dependency thing is becoming too much, in my humble opinion. Your mileage may vary. Void where prohibited by law. All right, what else is on this exam? Debugging, how do you debug? How do you put statements into debug? When do you use trace, when do you use debug? What's the difference between the two? Because they look the same. Code's the same, pretty much, except you say trace instead of debug. Which one do you use when? Why does something show up when you're in release mode if you use trace, and it won't show up in debug? So the debug only works in debug, in case you didn't know. Implementing diagnostics. So how do you do tracing, profiling? How do you monitor performance? Those are all under this one. And then the last section is data access. So you should know how to perform I/O to files, streams, at least be able to read the code for it, and know the order that you're supposed to do things. That's always a favorite. What order do we do these things? Here's some lines of code. Put them in the right order. Let's see. How do you consume data? So, and they'll probably ask not only about Entity Framework, but ADO.NET as well. So you'll see like using a connection, creating parameter objects. How do you create a parameter object? On the sample exam, they had an output parameter. How do you define an output parameter? Well, you set the direction on it. But you should know to set the direction on it and which directions are valid. That'll tell you which one's wrong, possibly. I don't know what's on, I don't know, I can't tell you the questions on the test, and actually I don't remember them. I took this a long time ago. So those kinds of things, those are going to be things that you need to know going in, at least be able to recognize when it's not right. Link. They're going to ask about link. I guarantee there's going to be link questions in there. By link, I mean language integrated query. I know they have link to SQL, and there's like two kinds of it. There's the predecessor of Entity Framework is link to SQL, and then they say link, language integrated query, link to SQL, using it against SQL, and that confuses me. But I just tell my students when I have classes, there's two kinds. There's one that actually is the predecessor for Entity Framework, and then there's link, which is really just link, because you pretty much write the same query. You could be, the collection, it works with any IEnumerable or iQueryable data source. So it could be just a list of files that you got from the file info or file object, right? Or the directory object. Could just be a list of files, and that works with link. Because pretty much any built-in collection that, or array that Microsoft has implements iQueryable or IEnumerable. Actually, iQueryable implements, or IEnumerable area, I forgot, one implements the other. So, forgot which way it went. Serialization, deserialization, you should know how to, XML serialization, JSON serialization, what the difference is and how do you get them. How do you mark a class to get it to be serialized via in XML? Use data contract and data member. And then the ones that you don't want to include, just don't add the data member attribute and it doesn't get serialized. And that'll serialize it as XML. How do you store data in and retrieve it from collections? You should know both the generic and the non-generic collection types. Another oxymoronic statement because the generic collections are actually type specific and the non-generic collections are non-type, or yeah, you get the idea. That's one of my other favorite ones to talk to my students about. All right, so that's what's on the test. That's it. That's the only things that are going to be on the test. They're not going to test you on other stuff. What's listed here is what's going to be on the test. Those are the objectives. The question writers use those objectives to write their exam questions. You're going to get them in roughly equal percentages because all of them are about a quarter. Unless they do 30% of all of them, and then I feel really sorry for you guys because you have 120% on the exam. But that's all. That's what you need to know. That's what's on the exam. It's right there on the website. Anybody can go there. You saw me go there. I didn't do anything special. It was just there. And then if you're not here and you want to do exam prep, there's some exam prep video. There's self-paced training. The program in C# Jumpstart. There's practice tests. I don't think there's links to the Measure Up one. I can never figure, it's like they changed how this link works. It looks different. It doesn't look like it's Measure Up. But there are a number of them, so if you don't like the one that the link takes you to. Let's see what the link takes us to. Yeah, MindHub, Pearson's MindHub. But Measure Up also has an approved one that we have across the hall. All right, so let's go and let's take a look at some slides now, because I wrote all, well, I stole all these slides. Did I say that out loud? There are slides here. soon as I find my cursor again, there it is. Whoa. 2 screens that are split view with 1 cursor can be confusing. There we go. Official first slide. Oh, that's me, Mark Rosenberg. I'm an MCT, Microsoft Certified Trainer. I am a most valuable professional, have been for 9 years now. If I get awarded on January 1, that'll be my 10th year. I'm looking forward to hoping that happens. I'm a senior development instructor at New Horizons. That's my Twitter handle. I don't tweet that often. Mostly I tweet when I'm at conferences like this, and I'm tweeting, here's where I am. This is the party I'm attending. All right, that's what we're going to mostly go through. We won't cover console.writeline, if that's okay with you guys. So this is the old roadmap. I should have deleted this slide. I didn't think about it. But the old deck. So we've gone through the skills measured. We've gone through what those topics are. This is the easy to see list. It's pretty much the same, except they all say 25 to 30% instead of these exacting percentage. So the thread object, the thread pool, I'll slow down so you can read them. I'm like, I covered most of this already. So the thread objects, what are its advantages and disadvantages? Well, it gives you complete control over the thread. Its disadvantage, it gives you complete control over the thread. What does that mean? You have more opportunity to destroy your application. You have more opportunity to mess up, to make a mistake. The thread pool is very efficient. It's preferred over creating threads manually. Why? Because you just take one that's already spun up from the thread pool. You don't have to create them from scratch. The disadvantage of the thread pool, which it doesn't say there, guess what you can't do from that? You can't access the UI thread, which can be important on things like XAML applications where you might want to access the UI thread from your background thread. You can't do that. Tasks. If you don't know what a task is, it represents an asynchronous operation. It has mostly 3 states. It's either working on it, done, or error. They can have a return type, but they don't have parameters. Whoops. Excuse me. New computer that hasn't run this slide before. I said trust this add-in, and then it zips to the next slide. Really? All right, well, I can't get it to stop. I said trust it. So here we have like a do work method. This is the work that gets done asynchronously in a background worker, and by the way, background worker does give you access to the UI thread. Here, notice the cancellation token. Y'all know why we use a cancellation token? Anybody? I'm sorry? Correct. But why do we bother to use a token to do it? So that we don't cancel the background thread while it's doing something important. We want to be able to control when the background thread actually stops executing. What if it opens a file and we stop it and it keeps the open file handle? Nobody can get at the file anymore, right? So in our background code, we want to be able to check to see if the cancellation token says stop working, and if it does, we control when that happens. When does it stop working? And that way we can ensure that we close files and close connections to databases and make sure we don't have open file handles where we have to restart the computer to actually access it. Async and await. God, these were great keywords. They were the only two keywords added to the language when they did it. And the reason for that is because trying to get the debugger to work with them and figure out how to make that step-through experience work, that was not easy. Just adding the keywords was pretty simple because it's just syntactic candy. The compiler writes a whole bunch of code for you when they appear. But actually getting them to debug properly so that you can step through that code, not so easy. That's what they spent the time on. And they spent almost 2 years on it. They talked about it to us. Actually, they were beta testing it for 2010. There was, I don't know if it still exists, there was a plugin for 2010 that you could get and add the keywords. And they really wanted everybody to do that because they wanted feedback as to whether what they thought was going to work actually worked. But it was tricky. So async and await. Await instructors the runtime to pause until the method completes. Remember, always send a task back except on top-level event handlers. I did say trust this add-in, and it doesn't trust it. This is the best slide in the world. Someone stole this. I have that slide. I'm going to show you this slide. It is the coolest slide in the world. They colored it differently. But here's how async works. This is for if you ever steal this slide, if you need to explain async to non-people. So here's what we have. Top-level event handler. It's async void. That's OK. It's top-level event handler. We have our message pump. Our message pump is just what responds to user input. Okay? When you do something, this is what it does. This is an animated slide. It's going to be way cool. We have marked our button one click event handler async. What does that mean? See, I almost tripped. I'm getting better. Async means that we're going to have an await in the method. That's all it means. All async does is say, I can put an await in this method. We're going to await load settings async. Here's load settings async. It returns a task because it was written correctly. So what's it going to do? Well, we're going to await this built-in download async. So here's what happens. Someone clicks the button. We hit the await. We call load settings async. We go to load settings async. We hit the await download async. Task is created. And it's passed back up to button one click. That task says that load settings async has not completed yet. It is in the incomplete state. We hit the await load settings async. So what happens? Focus goes back to the message pump. And the message pump is available to handle other events, like that click event that just appeared at the bottom of the screen. There it is again. All right, eventually, download async is going to finish. When download async finishes, come on, whoops, wrong way. When download async finishes, focus will go back to load settings async. And whatever code is left in load settings async will complete. That could be additional awaits, in which case focus would go back to the message pump. But there's no more code in load settings async. So the task changes to complete. Task changes state. It's now complete. So the await call for load settings async. Task complete. We go back up there. We run the rest of the code in button one click, and we're all done. If someone doesn't understand how async programming works, or await and async, this is the slide. I love this slide. I have no idea who wrote it. I stole it from the product team. Evidently, he stole it from the product team. But product team, guy who got it from the product team? I said, yeah, I did, was it speaker idle? And all these IT pros were telling me that's the best slide on async I've ever seen. And I'm like, told it to the guy from the product team. He goes, I have no idea who wrote that slide. But it is the best slide ever. Ah, cool. Here we go. I love this stuff. Here's a bad one. Why? Right there. Let's see what happens. Let's see why this is bad. So we hit send data. We go down to send data. We hit the await. Get response async. OK, we are at an await. Focus goes back to button one click. We hit the await task delay. Focus goes back to the message pump. Which one of these is going to finish first? Get response async or the task delay? Now, you probably wrote this in development, and so mostly the task delay finished first. You get it in production, who knows? More network traffic, more problems, who knows which one's going to finish? There's no way to know. So guess what? We don't know which ones of these finishes. That means mGetResponse may or may not have data in it. So, in fact, it's really obvious here. Send data, we await, get response, we go back up, finish executing, and go back. Now, here's the other little tricky part. What happens if get response async here throws an exception? Let's say it times out. What happens in this code? I'm sorry?
Never gets caught.
Never gets caught, correct. Well, it might. Depends what OS you're on. You either have an unhandled exception. If it's on mobile device, it just eats the exception. So, or at least if you're on a Windows phone, it eats the exception. So we don't know. The calling code has, because send data is async void, we have no way to know when that method finishes. There is no way to know. It will not work right. So the exception just gets thrown, goes who knows where. We essentially get, the easiest way to fix this, they didn't include that part of the slide. What should we do to fix this? Well, it's not async void, it's async task. Okay, then we're returning a task. The other part is we don't want to await the task delay. We want to await the call to send data. I can't reach that high. But we want to await the send data call. And if we just change those two little things, that would work. There's one other thing you should do. Because send data returns a task, it's now truly async. Send data async. Change the name. Truly asynchronous methods should all end in async. The framework generally does that. That's a convention that the framework generally follows. I don't know of a case where it doesn't. I don't want to say it never does that, because God knows one of you will know the one spot that it doesn't. But it does. It's not supposed to. Parallel for each. Let me get out of this mode and let me click this. Trust this added. It works on my computer. I'm sorry?
You are a developer.
I didn't cancel it. Swine. I did that, we did that. That's not going to work. All right. Here's an example of a question you might see. Okay, I got 20 minutes left. Here's an example of a question you might see. Because, by the way, parallel for it works. I could just plug in mine. Here we go. Line numbers are for reference. I'm going to go stand over here where I can see. So here we have a var called items. It's a new list of string. We have 3 strings in it. We're going to use an items.where and a lambda where we're calling method 1. and passing n in. And then we're going to go through the results and print them out. So this method isn't really slow, it isn't really fast. So how do we speed it up? We have choice A, B, C, or D. Who thinks it's A? How about B? C? Few of you. D? Anybody? 2. Come on. C. Yeah, you want to put this is the correct syntax for that. All right, here's another question. Let's see here. You have a method that accesses a database, and there's the code that doesn't. You need to ensure the original exception is thrown back to the caller. What code should you? So who thinks it's A? One of you. B? Few more. C? Few. D? Nobody. Come on. A, because A is just going to rethrow the original exception. Here, we're throwing a new exception, and we're taking the original one and making it's the inner exception. This would technically work, but it's not just. And returning EX, returning it won't work. See, it says we want the original exception thrown back to the caller. So throw the original exception. Create. All right, give me a moment. Let's see if I can open another version of this so that it works correctly. Otherwise, all my code's not going to appear. I didn't cancel it. Come on. It's really being annoying. And it worked in rehearsal. Give me one more minute here. Gosh. There it is. We'll work our way through it. Here we go. Public. Ignite. This one. Download. Save as. And we'll put it in downloads this time. There we go. Almost fixed. 10 more seconds. All right, so we are on slide 24. Okay. Done. Whoops. Today be nice. There we go. this. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And we are back. Constructors and inheritance. There we go. So create and use types. Let's talk about constructors and inheritance. So here we have a class called default constructor, a class called private constructor, and a class called custom constructor. And then we have a derived class, which inherits from custom constructor. And get rid of that. And where do I get? There we are. Doesn't it let me do that? Won't let me do that. Get rid of this. Getting used to two strings can be there. It won't unpin. All right, so we have a derived class with a custom constructor. What they're getting at here is where you have a derived class that's calling the base constructor, and they want to make sure you know how to deal with that. Another type of thing, how do you create a generic class or a generic method? And here you can see they're declaring a generic class that takes a type called T1, and we're restricting that type. So it must be either a class or it must have a default constructor. That's what the new does. So they might say something along the lines of which of these classes can be used as T1. Select all that apply. That's the kind of thing they'll give you. So let's do another practice test. You create a class using public class, class 1, and you add a method to a class named class 2 using class 1, or no, var class 1 equals new class 1. You need to ensure that it works correctly. Which interface should you implement? iClonable, iDisposable, iEquitable, or iComparer? Who thinks it's A? Nobody. B. C. D. Correct answer is A. iDisposable is just used for disposing of resources. That's all we use it for, is when we need to get rid of COM objects. That's the proper way to dispose of them. It's built into a lot of the classes like connection objects and stuff like that in the framework. It also uses, so iClonable is the one that they wanted to have you do. It does look like it should be iDisposable. I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah, that's the... All right. You have a class called program with static void main, yeah. A static void main. We have a string. We create a new class 1. Here's our class 1. It holds a public list of string called collection 1. You need to add string 1 to collection 1. What lines of code should you use? So who thinks A should be part of it? Nobody. B. Nobody. Remember, it says choose all that apply. C. One of you. D. Most of you. And the answer is actually C and D. Because you can't use class 1 until you create one. You can't use the class 1 collection one until you create a new list of string to hold it. All right, debug applications. I'm running out of time here, so we're going to go pretty quick. So reversible encryption, single key. So you have hello world, it becomes that, and then you should be able to get back to hello world. So you should know about the symmetric algorithms. You guys know about asymmetric and symmetric encryption. Is there anybody who doesn't know about that? What the difference is? Good, we don't cover that. So with two keys, by the way, those are the asymmetric algorithms that are built into .NET. How many of you think you could write a better algorithm than any of these? If anybody raised their hands, I would have been upset. Good. Hashing, irreversible encryption, right? We all know what we do with hashes, right? Passwords, yes. Thank you. Got somebody to respond. Yay, gold star for you. These are the hashing algorithms that are available. And by the way, this is also the correct namespace. So here's some of the code to serialize and deserialize. This can be pretty long and involved. You have all this in the slide deck. So, and I'll put the thing back up. Configuring tracing. So we have trace sources and trace listeners. Everybody know how the provider model works in .NET? Anybody confused by this? That way we can have as many listeners as we want. And as many sources going to those listeners, pretty much. So we have a source, we have a listener, we're going to add one. We can have switches so that we don't get too many error messages. So here we're setting up a trace source, which can then write out to any listener, in this case console. Why? Because we've already configured it. And then we can add trace events. Here's how you can do it programmatically, because pretty much anything you can do in the config file, you can do programmatically as well. Compiler directives. Are you guys familiar with compiler directives? A little bit? They can be really handy. They can say things like, yeah, don't compile this if we're doing debug, or if we're not doing debug. Or data access. So reading streams. This is pretty standard. You create a file stream. This is for binary, right? It's a binary reader, yeah. We can do strings. Link query, joins and link queries. That can be a little complex. So let's do another question, because I got 5 minutes left, and I want to have enough time for you guys to ask a question or two and make sure you get to lunch, because I think that's next. You're creating a process that processes orders. You need to ensure that all the orders are processed in the order in which they are received. What collection should you use? Who thinks it's A? B, C, D. Good. It's D. C is a stack that's last in, first step. Q, first in, first step. The easiest way to remember the difference, Q up for the bus in England, first in line, first on the bus. Stack, stack of quarters on the table. The top quarter, the last one on the stack, is the first one you grab. That's the easy way I have to remember them. Here's another question. Here's some lines of code. We're creating a list of integers called list1, which has 1, 2, 3, 4 in it. And then we have list1.where. That's a link statement that says we want to find the ones that are greater than 3. And then we write them out. And then we have add 5 to the list. And then we have another for each where we write all the items. We want to ensure both for each loops display the same data. So do you think it should be A, B, C, or D?
Clarify the question. You want the same result to be returned both times, or you want it to evaluate the question?
We need to ensure both for each loops display the same data. What that means is the right line should give me the same set of numbers. So, A. Anybody else? A is the correct answer. Why? Because here, we're doing the where clause. Okay, so we're filtering the data. And then we say toList. Who knows what toList does in link? toList freezes the data. Essentially, link doesn't run until you use the data. So in the example on the slide, the actual link query won't run till the first for each. But here's the problem. Between the two, we added 5. It's still going to pick up 5. The second one will have 5 in it. That... The idea is to freeze result, and yes, you're right, they do use list 1. So that wouldn't work. You're right, they already does. All right, some additional resources. These questions are always very picky. You can now see why. The Microsoft Learning site. We went through that. Virtual Academy is also a good place to get training. It's free. The Training and Certification Guide. I'm sorry? Yes, which is now out of date. It was not out of date until Monday. All right. Any questions you guys have? I have like 1 minute left. Yes? There can be. I can't exactly say yes or no. We went through the objectives. It is within the purview of the objectives, so yes. As to whether there is or not, I really can't say. We're not. The first rule of exam prep is don't talk about exam prep. Oh, no, wait, that's the exams. The first rule of taking an exam, you can't talk about taking an exam. Yes, sir? Mostly in Visual Studio, you can say that to create a PDB. Essentially, the difference between release and debug. Because the PDB file is how we take the raw C# code and match it up to the machine code. Yes.
The generic where restrictions, you said either, aren't those an and? It would have to be a class and they have the default?
They can be either or and. I didn't pay that. I did not pay close enough attention to the slide. Well,
Class, comma, new parameters.
I think that's an and. Yes, sir.
When do we expect the new version of exam based on new version of C#?
This one's on 2015. This is the current version. The test that they're currently running is on 4.5. I guess there's a Visual Studio 2015. Okay, so whatever's in 2015, it says 4.5 or 4.6. I don't, it's 4.6? So it's on the current version. They've updated it. I'm sorry?
And for .NET Core?
Those tests are probably, I don't know. .NET Core does not have a test yet. .NET Core, as of, I don't even think it's released yet officially. Sort of. It was sort of released in June. They're still playing with it. Yes, sir.
What do you need to pass the exam? Like what percent?
About 70 to 80%. It depends on the exam and how they do it. But generally, if you can do 80% on the 90% on the practices, you're fine.
Is there time allotment?
Yes, but it's like 3 hours. It's a ton of time.
The number of questions that
Thank you.
I'm not sure. I want to say 40, but I'm not positive. I am not 100% sure.
in the 3 hours, I don't believe is actual 3 hours of exam time. I think the 3 hour slot is preparation, check-in, things like that. So your actual time on the exam will probably less than that. But that information should be available when you go to schedule the exam.
Yeah, when you schedule the exam, it'll tell you how long you have to. When you get there, it says, "Here's how long you have," and then I think they can even tell you. I don't know if they can tell you how many questions there are or not. Do you know?
I can't remember if it gives that information, but
I have never not finished an exam in time. So, thank you.